Hello and welcome. It's Wednesday, November 3rd, and you're watching the Daily Report. Following weeks of heated diplomatic rhetoric and military posturing over Taiwan, top diplomats from Beijing and Washington sat down for talks on the sidelines of the G20 Summit in Rome this past Sunday. Now, we have more on what was said later on the program. Here first are the pandemic updates with our Kwon So-ah. So let's start here on the local front.
Sure, Sunny. We're seeing a surge by over 1,000 cases from the day before. That means 2,667 cases were tallied as of 12 a.m. this Wednesday, which is also the fourth highest number ever posted here in Korea since the beginning of the pandemic. It includes 2,640 domestic transmissions and 27 cases from abroad. Now, as I said, it is quite a jump from yesterday by over 1,000, and compared to last Wednesday, it is an on-week surge by 715 cases. Now, more than 1,000 cases were reported in the capital Seoul alone, close to 900 in Gyeonggi-do province, also a triple digit in Incheon, as well as here in Gyeongsangnam-do province, where the figure doubled compared to Tuesday. Now, meanwhile, the number of people that are currently in critical or severe condition has risen by 31, standing at 378 as of this Wednesday. And if we move over to our total number of infections, 370,640 cases have been accumulated so far. And with 18 new deaths, the death toll stands at 2,892. On the vaccination front, yesterday we had around 42,000 people who got their first jab, and also more than 87,000 who got their second jab of COVID-19 vaccine. Let's also take a look at the global figures now. As we have approached the middle of the work week, depending on where you are in the world, it might be Tuesday, but the numbers are increasing in the middle of the work week, with close to 407,000 new infections posted in the span of 24 hours, also a rise in fatalities with more than 7,500. Let's move over to the countries with the highest accumulated caseloads. Now, most of the countries here, from the U.S. To Iran, are seeing more than 10,000 cases on a daily basis, apart from France and Brazil here. Also, Germany and Ukraine are seeing more than 10,000 infections. And a country that's not on this list, Romania, which has the 29th highest caseload in the world, also reported a 5-digit figure in the past day. And those are the general updates I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for now. Right, back on the local COVID-19 situation, officials have voiced concerns about the recent rise in infections among children and the elderly, as well as an unsettling finding with regard to the recent losses of lives from COVID-19. For more, Cho Won-jung joins me now. Won-jung.
Good afternoon.
Right, then let's start with the death toll. I hear 1 out of every 4 people who passed away from COVID-19 was fully inoculated. Tell us more, Won-jung.
So that is unfortunately right. In the past 5 weeks, 1 in 4 people who died from COVID-19 were fully vaccinated. In that period, Korea reported 389 deaths, with 95 of them being breakthrough cases, a concerning figure for health authorities here.
Right, so Won-jung, how are officials explaining the recent rise in the death toll despite the relatively high vaccination rate here?
That is true. I mean, well, the government said it's because more infections have been reported among elderly people above the age of 60. And now many people in their 60s often have underlying conditions which increase the chances of them becoming severely ill from COVID or dying.
I see. And just how much of an increase are we talking about, Won-jung?
Okay, let's dive deep into this. According to the reports on Tuesday, from October 24th to 30th, 420 cases that week were reported in the seniors age over 60. That's an 18.3% increase from the previous week. Now, this is the first time that over 400 cases involving people in this age group were reported.
Right. But Won-jung, many of them were inoculated fully, right?
That is absolutely right. More than 91% of the age group have been fully vaccinated. Now, these infections are breakthrough cases. According to the reports, they are being reported from nursing homes and hospitals. Now, that being said, booster shots may need to be administered as soon as possible, as it appears that effectiveness of vaccines in these elders who were vaccinated much earlier than the rest of the population has decreased a lot over time.
Right, which is something that health authorities have been pointing out to. Right then, now Won-jung, let's talk about the recent jump in transmissions among our teenagers.
Sure, the Korean health authorities raised concern over the cluster infections among school students. Now, according to the authorities on Wednesday, the teenagers make up around a quarter of the total caseload, and it's rising gradually. And as you know, the college entrance exams will begin in 2 weeks, and in-person classes will be available for all students. The government will put all their efforts into keeping schools safe. Particularly, schools will have PCR tests ready on site in the greater Seoul area. Preventative support will be ready for those classes with full capacity. But also, I want to point out the majority of children in that age group have not yet been fully vaccinated, which makes very vulnerable when it comes to large outbreaks. Now, looking at vaccination reservation rate in 12 to 15, it's less than 28%, but the reservation rate for 16 to 17 is much higher, with more than 65%. So we'll see how that goes.
Right. Hopefully it will continue rising, though. All right, Wonjong, thank you for now, but stay with us for the broader talks later.
Of course.
Right. Now, in line with our phased transition out of the pandemic and into a new normal, authorities have shared their intentions to shift their attention to containing cases of severe illnesses and the losses of lives. Yet, as Soa will tell us, Wednesday's daily tally well above 2,000 has led to some words of concern, right, Soa?
Right, Sunny, we are just at the very early stage of our Living with COVID-19 scheme. So the rise in daily cases right now is not likely to have been attributed by the eased restrictions on business operation hours as well as on social gathering measures that just started this Monday. Also, effects from mass celebrations over the Halloween weekend are also should appear starting in the following week. So for now, government officials are attributing this to the anticipation ahead of our first phase of returning to normalcy that's led to more social activities, more movement and more spending. Data shows that there has been a 2.2% rise in movement across the nation in the past week from the previous one, and compared to 2 weeks ago, it's a rise by 6%. An on-week rise of 1.5% in movement on expressways was also posted. Now, officials are stressing that an increase in cases from here on is being predicted, but to minimize that is, individual compliance to mask-wearing rules, washing hands and ventilating is extremely important at this stage. Now, after Wednesday's tally came out, also earlier in the morning, Prime Minister Kim Boo-kyum stressed that the beginning of a gradual transition into normalcy does not mean that we have overcome the COVID-19 pandemic. But health authorities are also mentioning that we are highly expecting infections to rise from here on, and which is a natural development that we have to live with.
With long restricted social activities now reinvigorated, we're looking at when the country might reach a balance in our management of the outbreak, aided by high vaccination rates and the prevention guidelines being followed by our nation's people. We expect that a balance will be reached at a certain point following a steady rise in the number of cases for the time being, or the outbreak could be stabilized even further.
And Son added that we have been seeing examples in other countries where there have been sudden resurgences a little after they went to strategies such as the one we are following right now, the Living with COVID-19 strategy, and then they had to return to strict social distancing measures. But then there are also cases in abroad where we can see that have now come to the point where they are balancing the figure, that balance that Son was talking about, and that they are seeing a slight decrease after some time, and I hope that that will be the case here in Korea too.
Right, I hope so as well. Now, so as I mentioned earlier, the authorities here have been highlighting the importance of a stable medical capacity. Do we have any updates on that front?
Yes, as you said, that capacity is stable at this point, according to officials at the earlier briefing. So we've got around almost 54% of hospital beds available for those patients in critical or severe condition. Also, we have enough vacancy at community treatment centers as well as hospitals that are designated for treating COVID-19 patients. But what the Prime Minister earlier mentioned was if that capacity of hospital beds comes to the point at around 60%, that's when the government should give a warning. And also at 75%, we will have to maybe return to stricter prevention measures.
Right, a circuit breaker of sorts then. Now, so given the surge in infections among teenagers. I understand authorities are highlighting the importance of inoculations yet again.
Yes, so more social activities among students and teenagers is now expected after the return to our phased return to our gradual lives, and that also means more students and more students at schools as we are also in the midst of the second semester of the year, but also more activities at cram schools and after-school activities as well. So this is why officials are now seemingly having stronger recommendation for vaccination for these younger people. Let's take a closer listen.
We strongly recommend them to get vaccinated in light of the growing future risk of COVID-19 transmissions and the possibility of quarantine from coming into close contact with an infected person. Vaccinations not only lower risk of infection and serious illness, but they also provide freedom from quarantine, testing, and various restrictions.
Right, so there it is, a stronger push for vaccination among all age groups. And come tomorrow, that would be Thursday, November 4th, a special surveillance team will go on duty to ensure that our steps into this new normal are safe and sustainable, right, Wonjung?
That is absolutely right. I mean, like you said, for 2 weeks from November 4th and November 17th, the special inspection team will be on their duty to crack down any violations against social distancing measures. Now, it will mostly focus on businesses in the greater Seoul area, such as coffee shops, now the bars and the nursing homes. I also want to point out, to make sure the vaccine passes are being used particularly in the high-risk areas such as, like I said, the bars and singing rooms, and also for unvaccinated people, they have to use a PCR test within the 48 hours. So make sure the ways are being used in those areas. But this is all to prevent any large potential outbreaks in the greater Seoul area. So, but I also want to point out that the most important thing is individual prevention is the most important right now to sort of keep people safe at all times, even when inspection teams are not even there.
Right, taking a proactive and responsible approach to our efforts to live with COVID-19. Now, so as our colleague Wonjung mentioned this earlier, authorities are highlighting the importance of booster shots given the spike in transmissions among the elderly. Tell us more about this.
Right, booster shots are the answer to protecting senior citizens at this point. Also, the timing of when to receive additional doses matters as well. So in line with the government's aim to protect the most vulnerable, like the elderly population, from getting infected, developing serious illnesses, and also from dying. In line with that, the government announced special vaccination measures at nursing hospitals, nursing homes, and mental health centers this Wednesday. So let's take a listen to the gist of it by Son Young-ne, an official at the Health Ministry.
In principle, booster shots are provided 6 months after full vaccination, but we've made arrangements to fast-track the jabs by up to 4 weeks for those working or living in high-risk environments, such as nursing facilities. People who work at these locations will also be mandated to undergo PCR testing once a week, regardless of their vaccination status.
Once a week or even twice a week, the official added, depending on the severity of the COVID-19 situation by region. Now, people that work at these facilities, however, will be exempt from such measures if they have gotten their additional shot already. And we're already talking about booster shots regarding people working at such facilities because they have been already being administered with booster shots now because their first shots already happened in the end of February when Korea's vaccination campaign had started. Now, what the government is also trying to do is trying to employ people that are fully vaccinated if possible, because these facilities really do have many senior residents and patients living there. And yes, they are doing all they can to prevent these infections, especially cluster infections at such medical facilities. Now, last but not least, let me give you the numbers of the booster shots so far, Korea has administered more than 172,300 booster shots, and just yesterday, more than almost 56,000 booster shots were administered, and that's actually even a higher number than the number of people who got their first shot yesterday. So we can really see how this booster shot campaign is going on.
I see. All right, so as always, thank you very much for that update. And Won Jung, thank you. See you tomorrow. President Moon Jae-in is in Hungary as of late Tuesday for a state visit. His agenda there began with a tribute to victims of a tragic accident on the Danube River back in the year 2019. Our Blue House correspondent Kim Min-ji, who is part of the president's traveling press corps, files this report.
President Moon Jae-in began his visit to Hungary by paying respects to the 28 victims, mostly South Koreans, that were killed in a boat accident on the Danube River in 2019. Moon arrived in Budapest Tuesday evening for a state visit, the final leg of his 9-day Europe tour. A memorial to remember the deadly boat collision was inaugurated earlier this year.
The two countries should remember and be vigilant so that such a tragedy does not happen again.
On the evening of May 29, 2019, during heavy rain, the Viking Signan cruiser collided with the Havelani sightseeing boat, carrying 33 South Korean tourists and 2 Hungarian crew members, causing the boat to sink almost instantly. Just 7 tourists survived, while the remains of 1 South Korean has yet to be recovered. Hungary and South Korea still mourn the victims, with the disaster regarded as the worst on the Danube in more than half a century. The sightseeing ship has since been retired due to the damage it sustained, and in show of respect to the victims. The captain of the cruise liner is on trial for negligence, but denies any wrongdoing. During his state visit, Moon will also hold a summit with his Hungarian counterpart and attend a meeting of the Visegrad Group, which also includes the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Poland. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News, Budapest.
Now, before departing for Hungary, President Moon pledged to cut Korea's methane emissions by 30% by the end of the year 2030. The pledge was made at the COP26 in Glasgow. Chang Tae-yeon has more.
South Korea is set to sign up to new methane regulations, with President Moon Jae-in making the announcement during the global methane pledge on Tuesday local time.
에너지, 농축, 수산, 폐기물 분야에서 구체적인 감축 계획을 세우는 것은 물론 매립지와 처리 시설에서 메탄 가스를 회수하여 에너지로 재활용하는 방안도 모색하고 있습니다.
He added that South Korea will help other developing countries cut methane emissions by sharing policies, experience, and technology. This comes after nearly 90 countries are set to join the US and the European Union to cut the world's methane emissions by 30% by the end of 2030. In a similar move, US President Joe Biden on Tuesday also unveiled plans to cut methane emissions. The new rules proposed by the Environmental Protection Agency are aimed at slashing methane emissions for new and existing oil and gas infrastructure. The U.S. methane emissions reduction plan will coincide with the UN Climate Conference in Glasgow, Scotland. Methane is the second major cause of climate change, right after carbon dioxide. Data from the UN Environment Program suggest that methane emissions have been responsible for about 30% of global warming since pre-industrial times. And the new regulations could have a critical impact on the energy sector, as experts say it's the fastest and the most economical way to slash methane emissions. Chang Tae-yeon, Arirang News.
Also, at that UN climate conference in Glasgow, Korea is joining more than 100 countries in plans to halt and reverse deforestation. Here's Kim Da-mi.
More than 100 world leaders whose countries are home to over 85% of the world's forests will commit on Tuesday to halting and reversing deforestation and land degradation by 2030. It'll be the first substantial deal announced at the COP26 climate talks in Glasgow. Called the Declaration on Forest and Land Use, the pact involves countries with significant forest tracts, including as of Brazil, Indonesia, Canada, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Colombia. According to a statement from the Office of British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the declaration will cover forests totaling more than 13 million square miles, which is almost 340 times of the size of South Korea. Calling the pledge unprecedented, Johnson said the world will have a chance to end humanity's long history as a nature's conqueror and instead become its custodian. The project will be funded with more than $19 billion in public and private funds, backed by countries including the US, France, Canada, and Germany. In fact, starting next year, 12 countries, including the UK, have pledged to inject around $12 billion of public funding until 2025 to help developing countries, from tackling wildfires to restoring degraded land. The World Resources Institute says forests prevent carbon emissions from warming the climate by absorbing roughly 30% of the emissions. But the world continues to lose its natural climate buffer, including a forest area larger than the UK just last year. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, on the sidelines of the UN climate conference, US President Joe Biden reached out to his G7 counterparts as part of efforts to push forward the Build Back Better World initiative. Now, Mr. Biden also took time to point to China's absence at the global climate talks. Pyeonji reports.
On the second day of the COP26 Climate Summit in Glasgow, US President Joe Biden hosted a Build Back Better World roundtable. He said leaders at the summit can prove that democracy is strong by supporting infrastructure projects in the developing world.
Every project that's started, we should think about it from the perspective of climate. I mean that sincerely.
Build Back Better World is an initiative announced by Biden at a G7 summit in June to provide infrastructure to low and middle-income countries. Some have interpreted the plan as a US-led counterproposal to China's Belt and Road Initiative, a plan proposed by China in 2013, involving development and investment initiatives that will stretch from Asia to Europe and beyond. At a news conference at COP26, Biden said China had made a big mistake by not showing up at the climate conference.
I think it's been a big mistake, quite frankly, for China, with respect to China not showing up. The rest of the world is going to look to China and say, what value added are they providing? And they've lost an ability to influence people around the world and all the people here at COP.
Earlier on Sunday, following an end to a dispute over steel and aluminum tariffs between the US and the EU, the White House said that they will work together to restrict access to their markets for, quote, dirty steel, and also limit access to countries that dump steel in their markets, without naming China directly. An industry watcher says bilateral ties between the two countries are not going to get better anytime soon.
Biden keeps saying that he's going to have some kind of cooperation with China in very few fields, and climate change and CO2 reduction is just one of the few areas that the United States can cooperate with China. But we haven't seen any kind of progress and in this field either. So overall, the relationship between China and the United States is getting deteriorate in near future.
He also added that with an intensified rivalry between the US and China, countries including South Korea are in a very difficult position and forced to take sides. A difficult decision for any country. Pyeonji, Arirang News.
On the local front, Kakao Pay has debuted on the Korean stock market, opening at double the IPO price. Our Ji-young has details.
Stock in the fintech company Kakao Pay, affiliated with South Korea's largest smartphone chat application, Kakao Corporation, started strong on its KOSPI debut. It opened at 180,000 won, or about US $152, double the IPO price. Shortly after trading started, it had jumped another 28%. But it hasn't achieved 따상 yet, a local market slang describing the share opening at more than twice the IPO price and hitting the daily upper limit of 30% above the opening price. As of 11 a.m., Kakao Pay's market capitalization was around $20 billion, making it the 14th biggest company on the KOSPI. Last week, investors scrambled to get their hands on shares during the two-day pre-IPO subscription period. Investors showed high interest in Kakao Pay as it is the country's largest mobile payment service company with a membership of more than 20 million people.
I came to the branch because of the Kakao Pay pre-IPO bidding. We talk using Kakao app, and we use Kakao Pay whenever we transfer money online. I believe most people in South Korea use the service, and it's becoming more common. So I thought owning Kakao Pay shares could lead to a profit. I'm thinking of bidding for 100 shares today.
Retail investors poured in some $5 billion and submitted orders came to around 30 times the amount of stocks available. Each retail investor was able to get an average of 2.3 shares. Unlike other companies, Kakao Pay distributed all of the shares allotted for retail investors with an equal chance for each investor. At the company's IPO ceremony, Kakao Pay CEO Ryu Young-jun pledged to show Kakao Pay's continuous growth both at home and abroad through transparent management, user-centered financial innovation, and pursuing mutual benefit with franchise stores. 엄지영, 아리랑 뉴스.
Prospects for international travel are looking up as a growing number of countries adopt a new normal amid the pandemic. Having said that, we share with you the arrival and departure protocols at airports here to facilitate your movement across borders. Do take a look.
On November 1st, the much-anticipated Living with COVID-19 scheme began in earnest. Along with this, countries are now reopening borders to international travelers step by step.
Amid the pandemic that is still rampant, today we are going to take a closer look at both departure and arrival procedures taken at the airport.
This is Incheon International Airport, the gateway to Korea. At here, you can find 3 COVID-19 testing centers. At those testing sites, you can get PCR and antibody tests.
I took the PCR test because I'm going back to Bulgaria, and I'm going back because I've been here for 3 years and I graduated, I worked, and I'm going back home for work again.
미국으로 출국을 하게 됐고요. 지금 미국에서 이 검사 결과를 가져오라고 해서 받으러 왔어요.
Currently, many countries, including the United States and most European countries, require a negative PCR result or vaccination certificate.
We offer the PCR and antibody test daily, 365 days, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. PCR test is about 3 hours to get the result out. So if you just wanted to see the PCR, that's it. But we also offer the antigen and antibody test. It will be available within 1 hour.
Hawaii and Guam have become popular travel destinations. And if you're heading there, you must check travel requirements as they have their own travel guidance. Travel restrictions on overseas travelers from each country can be found on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Overseas Safety Travel website. Meanwhile, South Korea has signed a deal with Saipan and Singapore to create a so-called travel bubble this year. If you leave for a country that has signed a deal, self-isolation will be exempted or minimized.
트래블 버블은 한마디로 방역이 안전한 나라끼리 양국 간의 협약을 맺어서 그 격리 기간 세계적으로 14일간의 이제 도착지에서 있는 14일간의 격리 기간을 없애거나 최소화하자는 그런 약속이거든요. 트래블 버블을 맺은 국가끼리는 격리 기간을 없애서 자유로운 여행이 가능해지게 됩니다.
Meanwhile, quarantine measures may differ depending on the country that you're from, as well as your vaccination status and whether or not you have COVID-19 symptoms.
Symptomatic passengers will be tested for the virus, and if tested positive, they will be transferred to a designated hospital or a residential treatment center. For asymptomatic travelers, they are subject to different quarantine measures depending on the vaccination status. First, to be exempt from quarantine, 3 requirements, including being fully vaccinated, must be met. In addition, you must get negative PCR results on the first and between 6 and 7 days after arrival. Those who are not vaccinated will go through a 2-week self-quarantine period. Meanwhile, if you are returning from countries that are not eligible for quarantine exemption or that are deemed high risk, you must check quarantine authorities' website, as measures such as the quarantine period and additional tests may vary from country to country.
예방접종 완료자 격리면제 제외 국가 16개 나라를 선정하였습니다. 격리면제 제외 국가에서 11월 1일 이후 입국하는 경우에는 격리면제가 제외됩니다.
When traveling abroad with your child, the age of your child determines whether to self-quarantine after returning home.
부모가 예방접종을 완료하고 PCR 음성 확인서를 가져오는 경우에 자녀는 6세 미만 아동은 PCR 음성 확인서 없이 입국이 가능하고요. 들어와서 자가격리가 면제됩니다. 6세 이상의 아동의 경우는 부모가 예방접종 완료하고 PCR 음성 확인서를 받더라도 본인의 PCR 음성 확인서를 가지고 입국해야 하며 예방접종을 안 맞은 아동의 경우에는 자가격리 10일을 하게 됩니다.
Expectations for overseas travel are growing thanks to the implementation of the Living with COVID-19 scheme. However, it is important that we do need to follow quarantine measures thoroughly, such as getting vaccinated or complying with hygiene procedures for a safe trip. This has been 신새벽.
On the sidelines of the G20 Summit in Rome last week, top diplomats from China and the US held talks for the first time since their stormy session in Alaska back in March. Now, Taiwan-related matters took center stage, and for more on what was said, I have Professor Kim Hyun-wook from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. It's a pleasure to have you back, Professor Kim.
Thank you.
I also have Professor Chu Jae-woo from Kyung University. It's good to see you again, Professor Chu.
Yeah, good to see you again, Sunny.
Right, Professor Kim, we'll start with you then. Let's begin then with some of the words exchanged between the top diplomats from the US and China at their latest meeting over in Rome.
I think it was another clash between US and China. I think the focus this time was pretty much on the regional security issues. I think the US official mentioned about the risks of China coming from Xinjiang, Hong Kong, especially Taiwan. And especially about the Taiwan issues, clearly warned to Chinese officials that there should be no behaviors of China escalating tensions in the Taiwan Strait, and made it clear that U.S. would not accept any behavior of China, that escalates the instability of in the region. So I think this is a very clear signal from the United States to China not to intervene in the case of Taiwan.
Right. And staying with that, Professor Chu, what caught your attention with regard to the recent talks this past Sunday between the two diplomats?
Yes, obviously Professor Kim just gave us a US side of the story here. And I like to look at it from Chinese perspective, and obviously China wasn't too pleased with the United States stance on Taiwan and the recent moves and behavior too. Alone this year, Wang Yi complained that the U.S. Congress has obviously put motions on the floor with more than 300 resolutions against China, and so-called anti-China resolutions. 300 of them were put on the floor, and on top of that, Wang Yi also made it explicit that China wasn't too pleased with the United States sanctioning 900 individuals and Chinese companies that the United States has imposed
beginning last year. And obviously, you know, China wants the United States to stay out of its internal affairs, which they also include Taiwan into it. So they want to be really explicit about their stance on this particular issue this time.
Right. And staying with Taiwan, Professor Kim, last Tuesday, this is before the diplomatic talks between the US and China, Blinken called for Taiwan to be allowed greater involvement in UN agencies. And following those remarks, a confirmation was made on CNN last Thursday by Taiwan with regard to the presence of US military troops on the island to train Taiwanese forces. What do you suppose is the meaning of such recent public rhetoric from the two sides?
Yeah, right after the media appearance, you know, a lot of people were asking how many U.S. soldiers are, you know, residing in Taiwan, and the what has been revealed was like maybe 20 to 30, which was pretty much disappointing to Taiwanese people, because that would not be possibly the guarantee, security guarantee to Taiwan. How can 20 American soldiers can be an important security guarantee to Taiwan? But nevertheless, I think this kinds of policy move has been initiated from the Biden government. Began, of course, the Biden government. During the Trump government, one China policy was still intact, even though there were a lot of, you know, possibility by Trump to break it. After, you know, during the Trump government, there were a lot of high-level officials visiting Taiwan, and Biden came in. I think after a lot of, you know, arms support to Taiwan by Trump government, Biden government, I think, is inheriting all the kind of policies of Trump towards, you know, Taiwan. So I think now U.S. policies in between, you know, one China policy focus or Taiwan Relations Act. Which one is U.S. leaning towards? I'm not sure, but I think Biden government policy towards Taiwan is, you know, emphasizing security guarantee to Taiwan, which means that I think substantially one China policy is, you know, now getting weaker and weaker. And I think U.S. is making more focus and emphasis on, you know, accepting Taiwan as a official entity in the international community, I think.
Right. And given that scenario, Professor Chu, China, for its part, has made its disapproval quite clear, right? Could you tell us more?
Yes. Obviously, the United States has been suggesting to the international community that the international community should consider Taiwan as one of its members and allow Taiwan to be part of international organizations, which is basically most of them are, you know, non-political entities. So, for instance, like WHO, I'm with the United States on this particular question because, you know, Taiwan people are still people. They're human beings too, right? And they're subject to COVID and pandemic and all these diseases and so forth. We, as a human being, we should, you know, sympathize, you know, Taiwan people, and they should be included in WHO regardless whether it's a sovereign state or not. I don't think that should be a matter to our universal, you know, value.
Right. So on the humanitarian front, we need to recognize them as an entity.
That's right.
Professor Chu, according to a Hong Kong-based newspaper, well, to be specific, it was the South China Morning Post.
Yeah, that's right.
U.S. military presence in Taiwan, they say, they claim, the newspaper claims, it claims that is an open secret, and that by publicly confirming the presence of U.S. military forces in Taiwan, that Taiwan itself, Taipei, has broken a tacit mutual agreement or understanding between Beijing and Washington. What are your thoughts?
No, I don't think so. It's definitely a tacit mutual understanding is there, definitely, because let me put it this way. If you have an liaison office in your capital, right, for instance, okay, America is going to have a liaison office in Pyongyang. You know, that liaison office should be protected by its own defense sources. And obviously the United States will dispatch its Marine Corps once there's a liaison office in Pyongyang, for security reasons, right? And obviously, American Information Office in Taiwan is a liaison office, and it needs to be secured, protected, and therefore, you know, American Marine Corps are there. It's a very open secret. So that's why, if before the United States and North Korea will establish diplomatic relationship, they'll have to open up a liaison office in respective capital, and in that case, whether North Korea will accept that kind of deal, U.S. Marine Corps being there for the security reason of the liaison office, which is probably unlikely.
Right, we'll have to wait and see for that.
Yeah, that's right. So that's why you have to have, you have to post some sort of defense sources to protect your own people and security and liaison office for that matter. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Professor Kim, how do you respond to views that Taiwan plays a significant role when it comes to economic and national security interests for both the US and China?
I think most important thing is that Taiwan is the core interest for China. It is a target to be united. Indo-Pacific Command this year, Commander mentioned that maybe China possibly could invade Taiwan maybe in 6-7 years from now on, which means that Xi Jinping now with such a big dream of making China a bigger country possibly can invade Taiwan to make a unification. From the US perspective, I think Taiwan is also very important strategically and geopolitically. It clearly signals to the international community that the US still protects and provides security to its important ally, to Taiwan, which it would be very good, important implications for other allies like South Korea and Japan. And Taiwan is in the middle of a US sea lane of communications, very important area for the economic and trade interest for the United States. And also it's in the boundary, in the area, within the area of Chinese A2AD strategies, which means the anti-access and area denial strategies. That's what US calls Chinese strategies. That's the area that US tries to coast and block the expansion of China, but China in response tried to expand further. So this is the area that both countries wants to dominate. US wants to use its combat ships to block the Chinese expansions, and China on the other hand wants to expand by using missiles targeting US combat ships. So Taiwan is in the middle of those areas. So very important for the US strategies to deter and contain China. Other issues may be also very important that this is a symbolic area for US to stand up and prevent the coalitions of democracies in the world. Taiwan is an important democratic ally to the United States. So providing security to Taiwan in case some clash happens there is, I think, will be very important symbol for the United States that can send a message to the international community that the US is firm to stand up for preventing and protecting democracies in the world.
Right. Professor Kim, going back to what you mentioned a while back about talk of China perhaps thinking about a military campaign against Taiwan within the next 7 years or so. Personally, what are your thoughts on such prospects?
I think the possibility always there because maybe China and the United States both does not want to have a military clashes on any areas, including Taiwan, South China Sea, East China Sea areas. But military conflict can happen anywhere, with any kind of possibilities, haphazardly. Maybe China wants to expand its influence into Taiwan areas, but U.S. wants to prevent the influence of China into Taiwan. So a lot of FONOPs, freedom of navigation operations in that area by United States now. Other allies like British and Japanese combat ships also navigate there along with the United States, which which is a very big big thing for the China. So I think when those escalations heightens there, who knows? Some kinds of military clash, I think, is possible.
Right. moving forward, Professor Chu, I also hear Taiwan's semiconductor industry makes the island's continued freedom, so to speak, very, very crucial for the U.S. Could you explain that for us?
Yes, definitely, because obviously at the G20 Summit, President Biden made it really clear that he's going to rearrange the global supply chain, and that would be heavily focused on the high-tech end of, for instance, semiconductor, and Taiwan is key part of this semiconductor supply chain. And with Poundly semiconductor, Taiwan is obviously pretty much occupies the world market by sharing more than 40% of the supply. And Taiwan is also moving forward with building its plans abroad. For instance, recently Taiwan TSMC made an agreement to build a semiconductor plant in Japan with Sony, and so with the rearrangement of global supply chain, especially pertaining to semiconductor, Taiwan is going to be a key component here, and that's why Taiwan's value is going to be much more appreciated by the world of the democracy, or those players in the new global supply chain.
Right, including the U.S. then.
That's right.
Now, Professor Kim, let's shift the focus a little bit. Korea, for its part, also held talks with its counterparts from the US and China on the sidelines of the G20 Summit in Rome. Now, President Moon sat down with President Biden, and our top diplomat, Chung Eui-yong, sat down with Wang Yi. What can you tell us about these exchanges?
I think, as at G20, the South Korean government's diplomacy focused on Korean Peninsula issues. Now want to reinitiate the dialogue mood in the Korean Peninsula. What has been the issue posed by President Moon Jae-in, was the end of war declarations, which has been deeply discussed with the U.S. partner, but that was clearly denied by the Sullivan. I think maybe only political gestures fine for the United States, but other related measures were requested by North Korea, which cannot be accepted by the United States. So I think this time President Moon Jae-in talked about the possible visit of Pope to North Korea, which we don't know what's going to happen, and also with Chinese counterpart talked about the possible beginning of the U.S.-North Korea dialogue. I think China also agrees with it, because China does not want any kinds of North Korea's provocations, military provocations, and instability, because that would really make China a hassle, because China has a lot of homework in other areas. So.
Right, it does. And going back to what you mentioned, Professor Chu, during the G20 Summit, the U.S. delegation, Mr. Biden, held talks on the disruptions in the global supply chains. Now, having said that, what do you believe was quite notable in those talks, and how can Korea work to perhaps navigate tensions between China and the U.S.?
Yes, as we saw in the clip, Biden emphasized on his notion of building back a better world, and that implies also the inclusion of rearrangement of the global supply chain. And here in the clip, he also mentioned about, referring to China, dirty steel, and those products, those products coming from China are basically labeling as dirty, because of forced labors and human rights abusiveness in Xinjiang people and so forth. So here, I think going back to your question, where should South Korea stand on this tug of war between the United States and China? It's going to be really difficult because the China and the United States, they are obviously going in two different directions. They are just taking their own path. Especially China announcing its aspiration to build an international standard of its own, especially when it comes to high-end science and technology. that is going to be sort of implication that, where we could expect the world is heading towards to. For instance, I can make it as a simple example here. For instance, electric power, we have 220 volt and 110 volt, right? And in the West, you usually, use 110 volt. In Asia, 220 volt. Here, two different standards here. This is what China wants. And it thinks it can achieve this end with 1.5 billion market of its own. So China could care less about Biden's mimicking of China when it comes to global supply chain.
And what are your thoughts on such prospects?
I think it's likely to happen down the road, not in the near term, but probably in the mid to long term. And here, South Korean government should, especially the next coming government, should be really careful and think hard whether it should go with the United States or China when it comes to international standard.
Right, as we have our presidential election set for next year, early next year, that is. Professor Kim, what would be the impact of these tensions between Washington and Beijing with regard to Taipei on perhaps Seoul's efforts to deal with matters on the Korean Peninsula?
I don't think two countries' competition mood will make it easy for them to cooperate on the Korean Peninsula issues. I mean, I don't think they will have commonized policies towards North Korea. Never. I mean, they already diverged. I mean, China already talked about and supported, North Korea's, opinions and attitude to deal with the United States, rather than talking about how to denuclearize North Korea. I mean, I don't think U.S. and China would ever be able to agree upon North Korea policies for now. Right. And also, in addition to that, Taiwan issues would make them very neglect on Korean Peninsula issues. I mean, Biden now focuses on management through deterrence as far as North Korea policy is related. They would just manage North Korea issues so that North Korea would not cross red lines in military provocations. China too. China just wants stability in the Korean Peninsula. They don't want to be assertive and active in denuclearization issues. The only burden, I think, is on South Korea. I mean, as far as the competition between two superpowers gets deepened, I think, some countries like South Korea, which is urged to make a choice, would have such a big burden. So it's more about the South Korea rather than North Korea. Right
then, as Professor Chu said, the incoming administration next year has a lot of work to do.
Sure.
All right, Professor Kim, thank you very much for your thoughts. And Professor Chu, thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you.
Right, well, all diplomatic differences aside, one area of universal interest is perhaps that related to living with COVID-19. So do seek to adopt a safe and responsible manner in adapting to our new normal. Thank you for watching. See you on Thursday.